A step back into the archives of 2019 reveals exactly how Flutterwave and Moniepoint pulled off a spectacular corporate heist, shattering Nigeria's card monopoly in just 14 days and permanently altering the continent's payment landscape. In the same breath, a massive reality check hits the AI hype train. Data reveals that only 10% of Nigeria's working age population is actually using generative AI, reminding us of the huge gulf between boardroom excitement and real world adoption. And the corporate AI rollout continues elsewhere as Paystack launches its first major merchant dashboard redesign in a decade, transforming it into an AI native command center to support over 300,000 businesses. These and more stories on tech and innovation in Africa. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Tides Africa podcast. My name is Karen Maina, coming to you from Kenya, and joining me, as always, is the tech guru, Kelvin, in Nigeria. Kelvin, how are you doing today?
I'm trying to leave tech, but I'm doing well. Other than that, I think I didn't get enough sleep this weekend, though, because I was doing a lot of moving around and trying to organize for some things. I didn't get enough rest. I'm not as pumped this morning as I normally am, but we love doing the podcast, so I'm here.
Calvin, as we were speaking just before we started recording, I'm feeling a little bit off, a little bit under the weather, but in very African fashion, you don't go to hospital, you wait to see if the body will heal itself. So I've been doing that over the weekend. Still not sure if I want to go to the doctor. I want to try a few concoctions before that becomes my solution. But the show must go on, as we always say, the show must go on. So we're going to start out with Nigeria, some very interesting retrospectives, Flutterwave and Moniepoint, and how they broke the card monopoly in 14 days. That's quite interesting. So in 2019, these two companies launched products within 2 weeks of each other that dismantled a decade of card network dominance in Nigeria. On June 27th, Flutterwave introduced a bank transfer as a primary checkout option, and then you generate a unique virtual account number per transaction, and you get instant confirmation and zero manual reconciliation. 14 days later, Moniepoint, at that point was called Team Apt, launched MoneyFi that targeted the merchant's back end with a permanent dedicated account number per business. Two different companies simultaneously coming together and building a solution that completely changed the face of financial transactions in Nigeria. I know this is a place where you're very keen on, Calvin, and I'm keen to hear what you have to say about it.
I believe the best place to start is by setting the scene of
Ooh,
what payment looked
please
like
do.
at the time. Um, so one thing I would say is I'm a very big fan of adoption of technology. When cards were becoming more popular or just before, I was very keen on using cards. And same thing, once bank transfers started to look very reliable, I was also keen. So I'm always like trying to try the latest technology. So at the time in 2019, or just before, I should say, cards were the main mode of like payment when it came to e-commerce stores and point of sales. But the issue at the time was that they were not reliable. They failed quite a lot. So you could pick all these things, put in your cards, get to the cashier, and you couldn't pay because your card wasn't working. And bank transfers at the time, when it came to like banks, because they were using the pretty much the same underlying technology, they were not the best too at the time. They would take like some time to get there. You could just be hanging in limbo. So when Flutterwave and Moniepoint, they saw this issue, obviously they are building in the space. Flutterwave created the pay with bank transfer option. I think that was the first time that was put into like an actual use case. Now it's very common. You see it everywhere, but at the time it wasn't. And then Moniepoint on their own end, at the time they were called Team Apt, they created a solution with MoneyFi on the merchant end. MoneyFi was quite popular if you're building like any service that required payments, a lot of payments platforms you would use, most of them were dependent on Monify at the time. I worked in a couple of teams and it was always Monify that you would use because they also had a very good documentation for developers. So it was quite popular at the time as well. And once these two changes happened, the adoption for bank transfer increased because what happened was they were so reliable and they were also quite fast. So it put them on par with card payments. So you didn't just have one payment option, you had this new payment option that was discarding cards at the time. And now you look at it like just 6 years later, pay with bank transfer is everywhere. It's very reliable now. So it's quite interesting to see, to just go back and look and see how some of these fintechs disrupted the industry at the time.
Very interesting. So, from where I sit, if and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Flutterwave came up with the consumer checkout, while Moniepoint owned the merchant's cash flow, and then together they create a payment layer that just was able to compete the card out of the market in terms of cost, speed, and reliability. And it kind of gives you a really good example of how founders should look at consumer pain points, because if I can remember as well, in the early 2000s, I used my card a lot, and it was a normal pain point. It was a pain point that we normalized as people, that your card might not work. So you always had cash at hand with you just in case your card refused to work. And then someone looks at that and says, just because it's normal doesn't mean it's not a pain point for whom I can solve an issue. And it's also quite interesting that these two companies came together in this way to build two different layers of the same problem, and kind of just removed a competitor out of the market. Very cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fair to point out that they still needed a banking partner. In this case, it was Providus Bank. I remember back then when you try to pay with bank transfer on maybe a website, a lot of the time you see a Providus Bank account. And of course, getting to learn now that it's because it was one bank that was willing to partner with both Flutterwave and Moniepoint at the time. I mean, because there are some risks involved, right? So not many banks were willing to take that risk, but Providence Bank saw it as a way to put themselves into a space that fintechs were beginning to eat into, and it panned out well. These days, banks are more reliable. I know in subsequent years, you often now start seeing Wema Bank. Wema Bank is the other one that is quite popular for virtual accounts. So it's interesting the approach both companies used. One went from the consumer point of view, and then the other one solved for merchants. I believe Moniepoint has always been targeting merchants, businesses, and they have always solved from that point of view. And then Flutterwave does both. They do for merchants, but they also create some consumer solutions as well. And in some ways, you look at the numbers of the growth of bank transfer over the years. In 2018, we had 729 million naira, and by the next year, once this technology was introduced, it moved up to 1.1 billion, and by 2024, it was around 11 billion naira in transactions. So it has become quite significant when you think about payments in Nigeria. So beautiful innovation from the big fintechs. Moving on, a new report by Microsoft called Global AI Diffusion reveals that there is a large divide when it comes to AI adoption in Africa. And so some of the numbers from the report is that South Africa has a 23.1% of its working age population that actively uses generative AI products. Nigeria is at 10.1%, Kenya at 8.7%. And the numbers are quite fascinating because I looked at the numbers and I thought everybody was using like AI in Nigeria, right? But then the further I sat and really really thought about it, I realized that everybody around me is like someone that operates in the digital space. So, of course, they know about these generative AI tools, but the large majority of these small businesses are operating offline. And so they are not aware of generative AI or don't use it as much yet because it's still new technology. And that makes up a massive population, the informal market. And so they are not there yet. We are just in this tech bubble. Like I said at the beginning, it's a bubble I'm trying to leave at some point, hopefully. Yeah, it's always interesting to look at what the numbers say, and it opens your eyes to a lot of things when you get so buried in the digital space and look that there is life beyond the digital space. So it just got me thinking a bit for a moment.
Yeah, they're very shocking numbers. 8.7% in Kenya only are using AI. And yet, I thought we are like one of the biggest exporters of online workers in the African continent. So they're very shocking numbers for me as well. I don't know where you're going to once you leave tech. We'll discuss that some other day. But I do think what you said is right. We tend to operate within an echo chamber, a bubble. And so you think because everyone around you is using generative AI, then everyone is using generative AI. But I guess the question is what percentage of working age, because the term working age is very broad, what percentage of our people are actually working with computers? Most of them are not, right? They're in farms, they're in manufacturing industries, on the floor of manufacturing industries, baking or doing something else within the industry. They are in the garage, they are in our matatus and okadas, and not many of them have any use for AI at the moment. If we were to be quite honest and look at majority of our land is rural, right? So the highest percentage of our people are probably in more rural settings. They don't need access to AI so much yet. I do think we will slowly see it begin to infuse itself into those spaces. I don't know how fast. However, there's also other issues that we have to look into, mainly infrastructure. How many of our people have access to good connectivity, for example, Wi-Fi or even network, right? How many people are using smartphones? We still have quite a large chunk of our populations using the other phone. I don't know what it's called, but not the smartphone.
Symbian phones.
Yes, exactly. So there's that part first, and then there's also electricity. How many people have access? What percentage of our populations have access to energy? We just saw the other day Kenya not able to accommodate a data center because the amount of energy they need, we're not sure we can produce. So these are things that we're still grappling with as African countries. In the infrastructural part of it, I think is a major limitation. Then also just the digital skills. How many of our people have the skills to go online and do this work? I'm currently working with an organization that trains with AI, and we have a very large population of refugees in this country. How many of them have those skills? I mean, there's just a lot of nuances to the percentage of the population that has access to the online world, let alone AI itself. So I think this is going to take quite a long time. Obviously, it may be a disadvantage for us because we're being left behind. But even those of us who have access to this AI are very confused. So I'm not sure that we've not already been left behind. So it's a whole mess. I think I've said a lot. I'll be quiet now.
I believe you already touched on a lot of the issues as to why the adoption is currently low. Maybe it actually makes sense that the numbers are low. I think when it comes to like working age, it just means who can work. It doesn't really mean who has access to computers because then that's a different report. So I see it as basically who is of working age in terms of like legally. Is it from 18 or from 21 or from 16 even? I think it's an age thing. So what percentage of those people that are of age and currently working are using AI? And of course, when you break it down the way you broke it down, a lot of our systems are still very much driven by cash, even or bank transfers these days. And those interactions, a lot of them happen in the rural spaces and in the urban spaces. People are like the industries where people are working in don't really call for AI adoption at the moment. Our infrastructure is still quite behind, so there's a lot to do before we start to talk about AI adoption. I think it was just growth of AI was seen as something that was going to catapult Africa somehow. But then I'm like, how if you don't have the necessary ingredients to make it catapult Africa, then what is it going to work with? AI is not a magical solution. It requires a couple of needs that we don't currently have. And in time, maybe that will change, but I won't hold my breath.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's move on. Tether. I'm
That's a
moving.
good decision.
Tether, which is the world's largest stablecoin issuers, it has about 585 million users globally, has made a strategic investments into LemFi. Now, I don't know LemFi or LemFi, which is a financial platform that connects Africa and Asian diaspora communities in the UK, the US, and Canada, and Europe as well, with families that are back home. Stablecoin is Kelvin's place of excellence. So I'm going to let you take this one and I'll sit back and learn.
Okay, I think it's LemFi. At least I call it LemFi because I believe it's short for Lemonade Finance. I may be wrong, but last I remember that was the full name. And stablecoins. So stablecoins are quite interesting. I believe I always saw this coming. There's a lot of stablecoin adoption going on at the moment, especially in Africa. We've seen MasterCard making moves in this space. We've seen Visa as well making moves to increase the stablecoin adoption. They are doing a lot of partnerships with companies and startups that are already operating in that space. And now, of course, the biggest stablecoin issuer, Tether, is partnering with LemFi, which it's not one that I see coming, but it tells you a lot about African founders and making giant strides to push innovation across the continent. Of course, LemFi operates in that cross-border money transfer space. Their main offering is for people that are in the diaspora, the US, the UK, Canada, and Europe, sending money back to Africa and back and forth across Africa. So it makes sense for them. This partnership with Tether now creates the ability for them to use stablecoin infrastructure to send this money. We know that the old Swift, it's funny to call Swift old now, but old Swift networks are quite expensive and take some time for money to show up. Even though a lot of these cross-border fintech companies have been doing a lot of work in that space to improve the speed. But when it comes to stable coins and crypto in general, it's almost instantaneous. It takes a couple of seconds. So when you have a partnership with the issuer of the biggest stable coin, I believe it's just a plus to you. It increases the speed even more, and of course it reduces the cost as well, because the infrastructure for this is a lot more efficient than the older Swift networks. So all in all, it's a big plus. It's a big partnership for LemFi, and clearly they are not playing around. I guess because I don't really do a lot of this type of cross-border money transfer at the moment, I don't use them a lot. I don't think I've used them before, but I keep on hearing good things about them. So they must be doing something right, and it's awesome to see.
Yeah, fintech in Africa is maturing over the last 2 years as we've been hosting this podcast. We've seen a lot of maturity coming in. It's interesting also to see them use stablecoin as a rail for making these kinds of transactions faster and cheaper. And Obviously, in Africa alone, it's billions, I think 50 billion annually, that is being brought in through diaspora remittances or moving in diaspora remittances. And so, any way that you can decrease the cost and then improve the speed can be life changing for many people. I'm waiting to see how this affects the African receiver, the one who receives the income, because most of it flows in. So, yeah, very, very interesting because we're seeing a lot of maturity happening within the fintech space.
Something else that is increasing at the moment is AI adoption. While there are still a lot of gaps, like we talked about in the last story, there's still a lot of growth as well. And we can see it in the next story, which is Kenyan Airways is adopting AI for dynamic pricing. We know airlines are always adjusting prices based on market conditions, and it's something that I imagine from like a consumer standpoint. I've always thought about how that works. Do they have like dedicated people that just sit down and are monitoring market conditions, monitoring competitors and adjusting the prices? I've always wondered how that works behind the scenes. But then Kenya Airways has decided, you know what, we are just going to get an AI platform called Jupiter 5, and we are going to get it to do all of this adjustment in real time. And of course, we know this is one of the things that automation and maybe AI even are quite good at, adjusting things in real time without breaking a sweat. I believe it's more cost effective for them to do that. But like we talked about a couple of weeks back on the podcast, I hope there is a human in the loop, right? So it's not just a system that AI is just, running on its own without oversight. It's interesting to see a big airline like Kenyan Airways going in this direction. And yeah, I think it's one that is showing, just like our last story, is showing how companies are adopting AI. I believe it shows a use case that companies are, okay, we are not turning our entire product offering into like an AI company, not Kenyan AI Airways. We are just adopting it for this use case, and I believe it makes a lot of sense.
Kenyan AI or really, Kelvin? Anyway, let me not go there. I'm trying to be a very good girl today. So, a couple of things. There are a lot of trends that are in this one development with Kenya Airways. First of all, I do think there's a wide industry move towards AI within the travel industry for revenue forecasting and pricing and things like that. And also, obviously, one of the things that AI is trying to do is reduce overheads. So you want to be a lot more efficient while reducing your overheads. So that's number one. I think this is a trend that we have consistently seen within the travel space. The second thing is unification. Now, unification has been a trend for a while where you're trying to not have so many silos, you're trying not to work in such a fragmented way. So it has unified 4 workflows in one, which is very interesting because previously market monitoring, scenario testing, approval processing, and execution were being run in 4 different workflows. But now with AI, it's going to be able to be run in one workflow, which I think is also another trend that we have been seeing. Whether it is while incorporating AI or outside of AI, we're seeing a lot more unification happening and a lot more less fragmentation with workflows. Second thing is something that we discussed earlier this month, which is compliance. Now, they have talked about simulation before execution, which I think is a way for them to create guardrails. It's somehow hoping to be compliant and make sure that you're giving the right information. So it has to model the pricing before it goes live to make sure that it is conservative and within the regulations of the industry. So that to me is compliance. So that's another trend that we have seen taking over, and obviously we're seeing it within this development. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting use case for AI, a very good use case in my view, where you're able to give out timely information while making sure that your overheads and your costs stay low. I would like to see how this translates into transport, logistics, and hospitality sectors, because I do think that those are quite connected. So, waiting to see how that translates into those three industries as well. All right, on to the last story, still on AI and how organizations are using it. This time within the fintech space, Paystack has rolled out an AI dashboard for 300,000 companies. It's one of the first redesigns they have done in 10 years. And merchants can ask plain language questions about their payment data. For example, why is revenue down this week? Or perhaps which customer segments are driving growth for you? And you're able to receive answers, data, in a manner that you can grasp insights. So maybe it's summaries or charts or tables, and you're able to build some get insights from whatever it is that is generated. It's being powered by AI models, and these are integrated into Paystack's internally built APIs. So it's able to manage the conversations and interface with the data systems and screen responses, again with compliance. It screens all responses for safety and compliance before it delivers the answers to you. Very interesting use of AI here.
Very, very interesting. Very useful as well, because while I'm fond of charts and graphs personally, I know not everyone is. So it's great to have this way of asking your data what's going on, and it's able to answer you back. I think that's a game changer for this space stack dashboard. I believe it becomes a lot more useful. I was trying to see whether I could test it out, but I was having some issues setting up. So I would still get around to that, because I want to, it's not just testing for testing sake. I actually have an actual use case for it. So I believe it's would be very useful. But I think the other thing that is happening with Paystack is they are, just as they have done this redesign, the pretty much the first one they've done since the original dashboard, minor tweaks here and there, but this was a full redesign. And if you even try to use it, you see it's on a different URL. So it's completely rebuilt from ground up. But Paystack is beginning to consolidate beyond just a payment processor. They are now restructuring into more of a financial technology group. So they now have the Paystack Microfinance back. They have Zap, their consumer payment product, and they have this new venture called TSG Labs, which is a venture studio that is dedicated to building AI-driven solutions. So they are beginning to consolidate into a financial group, and I believe that's the next phase of their evolution. So it's one that we would be tapped in for, we would be keeping an eye out on, and see how it goes. Also, I think this was the AI episode, right?
Yeah, actually, it's made me think of something. So we've just spoken about two African companies that are right now experimenting with AI, and there's a research by McKinsey that came out that shows over 40% of African organizations are experimenting or implementing generative AI. But then on the flip side, we also have research that's showing only 8% in Kenya and 10% in Nigeria are using generative AI. So it's, I don't know, 40% of our organizations are experimenting and implementing generative AI, but only 10% of our people are using generative AI. Very conflicting
um,
numbers.
In a way, maybe. I think the way to reconcile it is to think about the brands as like separate entities. The brands are experimenting with AI, organizations are experimenting with AI, but how are employees using AI in their workflows? So maybe it's
True.
just a thing where the employees are not using AI as much as the employers are trying to
Hmm.
integrate AI, because just because you have integrated AI into your product doesn't mean like an
People are
employee
using.
is using the AI. Yeah.
True.
So I guess
Perhaps,
that's
yeah.
one way to reconcile it. But
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know.
You're right. You're making sense.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. AI adoption, I think that is where we are at. Brands would keep on experimenting because there's a lot of good things that you get with AI. It's just making sure that you set up guardrails that prevent it from going overboard. But other than that, it's quite good. So thank you for joining us on the AI episode. Hope you enjoyed, and see you on the next one.